I still remember the first day I met Shadow. That's what we ended up calling him. Shadow, because from the very first moment he stepped into our lives, he followed us everywhere. But if you'd seen him back then, you'd never believe this dog would become the heart of our family, or the reason we nearly lost everything. It all started on a gray Saturday afternoon. The kind of day where the sky looks heavy, like it might cry but doesn't. My wife, Sarah, had been talking for months about visiting the shelter. Just a look, she said. I knew what that meant. Sarah's heart had a way of seeing broken things, and wanted to fix them. And honestly, we all needed fixing back then. Life had been tough on us. I worked as a paramedic, running into chaos while struggling to hold my own world together. Sarah was a schoolteacher, tired but hopeful, always carrying extra pencils and snacks for kids who didn't have them. We had 2 children, Lily and Ethan, 9 and 6 years old, both bright in their own ways. But something in our home felt quiet, too quiet, like we were all waiting for something to fill the empty spaces. So when Sarah said, "Let's go to the shelter," I didn't argue. The shelter smelled of disinfectant and old straw. Rows of cages lined the walls, each with eyes peering out, some desperate, some angry, some too tired to care anymore. I could see Lily clutching her little notebook to her chest, wide-eyed, while Ethan held onto my hand tighter than usual. That's when I saw him. A medium-sized dog, dark for a streak with white across his chest. His ears stood awkwardly, one bent slightly, as if life had knocked it crooked, but it was his eyes that stopped me cold. They were tired, yes, but not broken. Eyes that had seen disappointment, yet still held a fragile hope. He didn't bark when we walked past. He didn't jump or whine. He just watched, silent, waiting. "Dad," Lily whispered, tugging my sleeve. "That one." I knelt down, looked through the bars, and for a moment it felt like he was looking right through me. Ethan slipped his little hand into the cage, and the dog, this quiet, waiting soul, leaned forward and licked his fingers, gentle as falling rain. Sarah's voice cracked when she said, "We'll take him." That night, Shadow lay curled at the foot of Ethan's bed, his chest rising and falling in the rhythm of safety. My son, who usually needed a nightlight and 2 stuffed animals to sleep, drifted off with his hand tangled in Shadow's fur. Lily sat beside them, reading aloud from one of her fairy tale books, her voice soft, steady. The house felt alive in a way it hadn't in years. We started taking evening walks as a family again, Shadow trotting happily beside us. Neighbors waved. Kids ran up to pet him. Even the older couple down the street chuckled at his clumsy ears and wagging tail. One night at dinner, I joked, "Feels like Shadow rescued us, not the other way around." Sarah smiled, and for the first time in a long while, I saw real light in her eyes. For weeks, everything felt right, and then one morning I opened the mailbox. It was a white envelope, thicker than usual, stamped with the seal of our homeowners association. I tore it open, scanning quickly, expecting some boring reminder about trash bins or lawn heights. But as my eyes ran over the words, my chest tightened. It said Shadow's breed, though we'd never been told he was anything more than a mix, was classified as restricted. According to the HOA bylaws, these breeds were not allowed within the neighborhood due to safety concerns. The letter didn't end there. It warned that if Shadow remained in our home, fines of $100 per day would begin immediately. And if the fines were not paid, further action could include liens on our property or even eviction proceedings. Eviction. Over a dog. Over our dog. I felt sick. When Sarah read it, her hand shook so badly she nearly dropped the paper. Lily asked what was wrong, and before I could stop her, Sarah blurted, "They're saying we can't keep Shadow." Lily's face crumpled. Ethan dropped his fork, slid from his chair, and wrapped his arms around Shadow's neck. "They can't take him," he whispered. "He's ours." The next morning, I called the HOA office. A woman answered, her tone clipped, rehearsed. "This is Michael Parker." I said, trying to keep calm. "We just adopted a rescue dog. We got a letter about a violation, but there must be some mistake." She didn't hesitate. "The rules are clear, Mr. Parker. Restricted breeds are not permitted. He's not dangerous, I argued. He's gentle. He sleeps in my son's bed, for God's sake. Her voice didn't waver. Rules are rules. Either comply or you'll face the consequences. And then she hung up. I sat there staring at the phone, my knuckles white. Shadow curled at my feet, unaware that his very existence was being debated by people who had never even met him. It didn't take long. A week later, another letter arrived. This one wasn't a warning. It was a bill. 7 days at $100 a day. $700. Sarah gasped when she saw it. Michael, we can't. I know. I cut her off, rubbing my temples. Our savings weren't built for this. We lived paycheck to paycheck. $700 in 1 week? If this continued, we'd be bankrupt in a month. And then, just to twist a knife, I noticed a fine print. If violation is not corrected within 30 days, HOA may pursue legal action, including but not limited to property lien or eviction. Word spread fast. Some neighbors knocked on our door, offering support. A few even signed petitions saying Shadow wasn't a threat. But others looked at us differently, crossed the street instead of waving, whispered as we passed. One evening, I caught a neighbor I barely knew snapping photos of Shadow in our yard. When I asked what he was doing, he just shrugged and muttered, "Rules are rules." That night, I lay awake, listening to Shadow's steady breathing by the kids' beds, and wonder how long we could fight this. Because this wasn't just about a dog anymore. This was about control, about power, and about how far the HOA was willing to go to enforce their so-called rules. What I didn't know then was just how ugly this fight would get. Before I tell you how bad things got for us, I want to tell you what I later learned about Shadow. Because to understand why I refused to give him up, you have to know who he really was. Not what the HOA labeled him, not what the bylaws claimed, but the truth. Shadow had been abandoned twice before we found him. The shelter staff told me that he'd been surrendered once as a puppy, returned after just a few months when his family couldn't handle him. Then again, as an older dog, when his second family moved and decided he wasn't worth the trouble. Twice, he'd been left behind. Twice, he'd been told he didn't belong. And yet, when I looked into his eyes that first day at the shelter, there wasn't bitterness. There wasn't anger. There was only hope. A fragile hope, but real. That's what broke me. That's why, when the HOA said he was restricted, I couldn't just hand him back. Because for Shadow, this was his last chance. And for us, maybe it was too. As the fines piled up, so did the whispers. I heard them in the grocery store when Sarah and I walked in. I saw curtains twitch when I took Shadow for walks. Some neighbors were kind, whispering, "Hang in there, Michael, we're with you." But others weren't so subtle. One man stopped me on the sidewalk. He leaned in, his voice low but sharp. "You know, if that dog hurt someone, it's on you. On your kids, too." I clenched my jaw, held Shadow's leash tight, and walked away. But inside, the anger burned. Shadow hadn't so much as growled at anyone. The only thing he'd done was love my children without condition. It amazed me how quickly fear could spread, even without a single shred of truth. Then came the photos. Every few days, I'd see someone lingering near our house, phone in hand, snapping pictures of Shadow lying in the yard or sitting on the porch. A week later, I get another notice from the HOA. Dog off leash. Dog too close to common property. Violation of noise ordinance. Noise ordinance? Shadow barely barked. He wasn't a loud dog, but the HOA didn't care. They took every complaint at face value, no matter how absurd. It felt like we were being hunted, watched, targeted. Sarah started closing the blinds during the day. Ethan cried when strangers took photos of Shadow. Lily stopped walking him to school, afraid someone might say he was threatening. We weren't just fighting the HOA anymore. We were fighting our entire neighborhood. I'll never forget the first HOA meeting we attended after the letter started. The room smelled of coffee and carpet glue, a bland community center space with folding chairs, and a long table at the front where the board sat like judges in a courtroom. I stood with Sarah beside me, Shadow waiting at home, unaware that his fate might be decided in that room. The president, a gray-haired man named Robert Miller, cleared his throat and adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Parker," he began, "we appreciate you being here. However, the matter is simple. Breed restrictions are outlined in the bylaws. Your dog is in violation. The fines will continue until the violation is corrected." "Corrected?" I asked, my voice echoing. "This isn't a leaky roof. This is my family's dog. He's done nothing wrong." Miller's lips thinned. "Rules exist for a reason. It's not personal." I laughed bitterly. "It feels pretty damn personal when you're threatening to evict my family over a dog who's never hurt anyone." Murmurs rippled through the audience. Some neighbors nodded in sympathy. Others frowned. One woman raised her hand to speak. "I've seen that dog. He's gentle. My kids love him." But another man snapped back. "All it takes is one incident. The rules are there to protect us." The room split down the middle. Voices rose, fingers pointed. And through it all, Miller sat still, hands folded, eyes cold. By the end, nothing had changed. The fines would continue. As we left, Sarah whispered, "It's like talking to a wall." But I wasn't ready to give up. 2 months in, the fines had reached nearly $6,000. $6,000. More than a vacation, more than a used car, more than we could afford. Sarah and I argued late at night, our voices hushed but sharp. "We can't keep paying this," she said, tears in her eyes. "We'll lose the house. And if we give up Shadow, will we lose then?" I shot back. Silence. That was the question we never wanted to answer. Because Shadow wasn't just a dog. He was family. He was healing we didn't even realize we needed until he was with us. But the HOA didn't care about healing. They cared about control. One morning, we woke up to find our fence spray painted with the words, "Dangerous dog out." Lily gasped when she saw it. Ethan cried. I scrubbed the paint off, my hands blistering, my anger boiling over. This wasn't just the HOA anymore. Someone in our neighborhood had decided to take matters into their own hands. That night, Sarah whispered, "What if they hurt him?" I didn't have an answer. For the first time, I realized this wasn't just about fines. This was about safety, Shadow's safety, and ours. And still, I refused to let him go. The final straw came 3 months in. We received notice that if the fines weren't paid within 10 days, the HOA would begin legal proceedings to place a lien on our home. A lien over a dog. I sat at the kitchen table staring at the letter, Shadow asleep at my feet, and I felt the walls closing in. Sarah sat across from me, her face pale. "Michael," she whispered, "we can't fight them anymore. We'll lose everything." Lily slammed her notebook on the table, tears streaming down her face. "You can't let them take him. He's ours." Ethan crawled under the table, wrapping his arms around Shadow's neck, sobbing into his fur. That's when I knew. No matter what the HOA did, no matter how much they threatened, we couldn't back down. Because giving up Shadow would mean teaching my kids that fear wins. That cruelty wins. And I couldn't do that. Not to them. Not to Shadow. I didn't know it then, but this fight was about to grow bigger than our street, bigger than our neighborhood. Soon, the whole town, maybe even the whole country, would know about Shadow. And once the story spread, there'd be no turning back. I never planned to go public. I thought maybe if I kept fighting quietly, we'd find some loophole, some compromise, and it would all go away. But the HOA wasn't backing down, and neither was I. And when people feel trapped, they either break or they break through. It was Sarah who suggested it. She sat at the kitchen table, eyes swollen from crying, and said, "What if the news told our story? Maybe then they'll realize how ridiculous this is." At first, I resisted. You think they'll care? People have bigger problems than one family's dog. But she was right. This wasn't just about Shadow. This was about power. And deep down, I hoped maybe, just maybe, someone out there would care enough to help. So I called a local reporter. A young woman named Jessica showed up at our doorstep the next afternoon with a cameraman. She sat in our living room, recording as Lily hugged Shadow tight, and Ethan explained in a small, broken voice that Shadow makes the nightmares go away. Jessica's eyes glistened as she listened. And when the piece aired that evening on the 6 o'clock news, everything changed. By morning, Our phone was buzzing nonstop. Some were neighbors offering support. Others were strangers from across town. People dropped off bags of dog food, toys, even envelopes with $20 bills inside. Online, the story went viral. Family threatened with eviction over rescue dog. That headline spread like wildfire. Comments poured in, outrage, sympathy, even offers from lawyers who wanted to help. But not everyone was kind. We woke up to hate emails, anonymous messages calling us selfish and reckless. One even said, "Hope your mutt gets put down before he hurt someone." Sarah trembled reading them. I tried to hide them from the kids, but Lily was too smart. She saw one on my phone and slammed it down on the table, tears streaming down her face. How can people hate him? He didn't do anything. I didn't have an answer. If I thought the media attention would scare the HOA into backing off, I was dead wrong. Robert Miller, the HOA president, issued a statement the very next day. He claimed the rules existed for the safety and harmony of a neighborhood. He said allowing us to break them would set a dangerous precedent. Dangerous precedent. Over a dog who had never even barked at anyone. And then, as if to make an example of us, the fines increased. What had been $100 per day became $200. Within weeks, we were staring at over $10,000 in debt. $10,000. More money than we had ever owed anyone in our lives. It felt less like a fine and more like extortion. The stress was crushing us. Sarah and I fought more in those weeks than in our entire marriage. Late at night, when the kids were asleep, we whispered heated arguments across the kitchen table. "We can't do this anymore," she'd say, her voice cracking. "Michael, we're drowning. And you want me to just hand him over?" I'd snap back, tell the kids their best friend doesn't belong here because of some line in a rule book. Silence. Always silence after that. Because deep down, we both knew there was no good answer. Even Lily, my brave little girl, started to lose hope. She stopped drawing. She stopped writing in her notebook. One night, I found her sitting on the floor of her room, clutching Shadow, whispering, "Don't worry, I'll never let them take you." It broke me. It wasn't just the fines. It was the constant harassment. One morning, we walked outside to find our mailbox stuffed with anonymous flyers. "Dangerous dog in the neighborhood." They screamed in bold letters, with a photo of Shadow someone had clearly taken without our permission. Another night, rocks were thrown at our fence. Shadow barked. The first time I'd ever heard him bark angrily, and I rushed outside, but whoever was had already disappeared into the dark. The final straw came when Lily came home from school in tears. Some kids had taunted her, chanting, "Your dog's a monster. Your dog's a monster." She ran into her room and slammed the door. Shadow followed, curling up beside her, ears drooping as if he understood her pain. I stood in the hallway, fists clenched, and realized this fight wasn't just about Shadow anymore. It was about us, about whether we were going to let fear and cruelty dictate our lives. Just when things felt impossible, hope appeared. A local lawyer named Daniel called after seeing our story on the news. "I'll represent you pro bono," he said. "This isn't just about your dog. This is about the abuse of power." I didn't even know what to say. Relief flooded through me. Sarah burst into tears on the phone. For the first time in months, it felt like maybe, just maybe, we had a chance. Daniel came over that weekend. He sat at our kitchen table, reviewing the HOA bylaws. "Their case is weak," he said. "Breed restrictions are vague, and Shadow hasn't caused any incidents. This is harassment. We'll fight this in court." And that's when I realized this wasn't just going to be letters and fines anymore. This was going to be a full-blown legal battle. But before the courtroom came the darkest night of my life. It was late, maybe 2 a.m, when Shadow started barking, loud, frantic. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Sarah grabbed my arm. "Michael, something's wrong." I rushed outside, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Our gate was wide open. Someone had tried to lure Shadow out. There was raw meat scattered on the sidewalk, laced with something, I could smell it, poison. Shadow had barked so furiously, so loudly, that he hadn't touched it. He'd save himself. But if he had eaten even a bite, I collapsed to my knees, shaking with rage and terror. Sarah held me as tears streamed down my face. "They tried to kill him," I whispered. "They actually tried to kill him." That was the moment I knew this fight had gone too far. We weren't just fighting for Shadow's right to live with us. We were fighting for his life. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the porch with Shadow curled at my feet, my hand on his back, promising him silently, I will not let them win. Not like this. The next morning, Daniel filed a lawsuit. And just like that, the battle moved from the streets of our neighborhood to the walls of a courtroom. The day finally came. A date had been set. Our battle with the HOA wasn't going to be fought in letters anymore. It was going to be decided in a courtroom. The morning of the hearing, my hands shook as I buttoned my shirt. Sarah moved slowly, pale but determined. The kids were staying with Sarah's sister, but before we left, Lily grabbed my arm. Her eyes, red from crying the night before, looked into mine. "Dad," she whispered, "don't let them take Shadow." I hugged her so tightly I thought my ribs would crack. "I promise, sweetheart, I won't." But inside I was terrified, because promises are easy to make and nearly impossible to keep when someone else holds the power. The courthouse smelled of old wood and nerves. People shuffled in and out of rooms, papers rustling, voices echoing against high ceilings. We sat at a long wooden table with our lawyer, Daniel, while across from us sat Robert Miller, the HOA president, flanked by their attorney, a sharp-dressed man with cold eyes and a smirk that made my skin crawl. Shadow wasn't allowed inside, of course, but I carried his photo in my pocket. Every time fear crept in, I reached for it, rubbing the edges until the paper wore thin. When the judge entered, everyone stood. My knees trembled as I rose. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about whether Shadow got to live with us, or whether we'd lose him forever. Daniel stood first. His voice was calm but firm, echoing through the room. "Your Honor, this is not a case about safety. This is a case about control. My clients, the Parkers, rescued a dog from a shelter, a gentle, loving animal who has harmed no one. And yet, the HOA seeks to punish them, to evict them over vague and discriminatory rules. This is harassment, plain and simple." I felt a flicker of hope. Then the HOA's lawyer rose. His voice was slick, rehearsed. "Your Honor, this is not about emotion. This is about rules. The HOA bylaws clearly state that certain breeds are restricted for the safety of residents. The Parkers knowingly violated those rules. This case is simple. Enforce the bylaws or open the door to chaos in the community." My stomach churned. Chaos. That's what they thought Shadow was. Chaos wrapped in fur. They brought their first witness, a neighbor named Mr. Daniels, the one I caught snapping photos. He walked stiffly to the stand, glanced at me once, then fixed his eyes forward. "I've seen the dog off-leash," he said. "I've heard him barking at night. It makes me feel unsafe." I wanted to shout, "That's a lie." Shadow had never been off-leash. Never barked at night, except that one time when someone tried to poison him. But Daniel squeezed my arm, signaling me to stay silent. Then they brought another neighbor. She wrung her hands nervously, glancing at Robert Miller for approval. "I have children," she said. "What if the dog attacks them? We shouldn't have to wait until something happens." I wanted to cry. Shadow had played with her children. They had giggled as he rolled on his back for belly rubs. And now she was painting him as a monster. Finally, it was our turn. Daniel called Sarah to the stand first. Her voice shook as she described the night we found Shadow, how he'd curled at Ethan's feet and made him feel safe. She talked about the vandalism, the harassment, the poison left in our yard. By the time she finished, tears streamed down her cheeks. Then Daniel called me. I walked slowly to the stand, my heart pounding. "Your Honor," I began, my voice catching. "This isn't just a dog. He's family. He's my children's protector. He's the reason my son doesn't wake up screaming from nightmares anymore. He hasn't hurt anyone. All he's done is love us. And yet, we're being punished as if we brought danger into this neighborhood. Shadow isn't dangerous. But this is..." I held up one of the flyers someone had stuffed in our mailbox. The one screaming, "Dangerous dog out." The judge studied it for a long moment, his brow furrowed. Then came the moment that shifted everything. Daniel called the shelter worker who had cared for Shadow before we adopted him. She walked to the stand, holding a worn file. "This dog was abandoned twice," she said softly. "He's been through more than most animals ever should. And yet, in all my years at the shelter, I never once saw him act aggressively. Not once. He was gentle, patient, even with children. If there's a dangerous dog in this community, it is not Shadow." Her words hung in the air like a prayer. Finally, Robert Miller himself took the stand. His voice was calm, almost smug. "This is not about one family's feelings. This is about the rule of law. If we let the Parkers break this rule, what's next? Chickens in every yard? Boats parked on every lawn? The rules are there for a reason, and they must be enforced equally." Daniel's cross-examination was sharp. "Mr. Miller, has Shadow ever bitten anyone?" "No." "Has Shadow ever attacked another animal?" "No." "Then, in your view, the violation is not about behavior, but about appearance?" Miller shifted uncomfortably. "It's about the bylaws." "The bylaws that you, as president, interpret and enforce at your discretion?" Miller's jaw tightened. "Yes." The courtroom buzzed. For the first time, I saw doubt flicker in the judge's eyes. Daniel stood tall, his voice steady. "Your Honor, rules should protect people, not punish them for compassion. The HOA has offered no evidence that Shadow is dangerous, because none exists. What exists is fear, fueled by control. If we allow this kind of power to go unchecked, then no act of kindness will be safe. Today, you are not just deciding Shadow's fate. You are deciding whether love can exist without fear." Then the HOA's lawyer spoke. "Rules are rules, Your Honor. To bend them for one family is to invite chaos for all." Silence filled the room as the judge leaned back, fingers steepled, deep in thought. When the judge finally spoke, the room felt utterly still. "I have reviewed the evidence. The HOA has provided no incidents, no proof, no justification beyond vague bylaws. The Parker's dog has caused no harm. The fines, the harassment, the threats of eviction, these are not the actions of fair association. They are the actions of an association overstepping its power." He paused, and my heart nearly stopped. "Therefore, I rule in favor of the Parkers. The fines are dismissed. The HOA is ordered to cease all harassment regarding the dog. Shadow will remain with his family." The gavel struck. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Then Sarah let out a sob, throwing her arms around me. Tears blurred my vision as Daniel clapped me on the back. We had won. Shadow was safe. But victory didn't erase the scars. It didn't undo the hate, the vandalism, the poison. What it did do was prove something I'll never forget. That sometimes the smallest battles, fought for love, for kindness, for family, can topple the biggest giants. And Shadow, that night, when we brought him home from the courthouse, he curled up at Ethan's feet as if nothing had ever happened. Because to him, love had never been in question. When we walked out of that courthouse, the sun felt different, warmer, sharper, like the world itself was reminding me that we'd made it through the storm. Sarah clung to my arm, still trembling with relief. Daniel walked beside us, smiling for the first time since we'd met him. And when we reached the parking lot, there was a small crowd waiting. Neighbors, strangers, people who had followed our story in the news. Some cheered, some clapped. One woman pressed a bouquet of flowers into Sarah's hands. Another gave Lily a stuffed dog that looked almost exactly like Shadow. I held my head high, but inside, I felt broken and whole at the same time. Broken from months of fear and cruelty. Whole because we had survived it. And as I slid into the car, I whispered the words I'd been aching to say. "We're going home. Shadow, we're going home." That night was one of the sweetest of my life. When we pulled into the driveway, Lily ran ahead, throwing open the front door, calling, "Shadow, Shadow, we're home." He bounded toward us, ears flopping, tail wagging so hard his whole body shook. Ethan buried his face in his fur, giggling and crying at the same time. Sarah knelt beside them, arms wrapped around all three, tears streaming down her cheeks. And me? I just stood there, watching my family, my dog, my life safe, whole, together. For the first time in months, I let out a deep breath, one I hadn't even realized I'd been holding. Of course, the fight left scars. Not everyone in the neighborhood was happy about the verdict. Some congratulated us, saying justice had been served. Others muttered under their breath, their glares sharp enough to cut glass. Robert Miller resigned as HOA president a month later, though he never apologized. The new board quietly amended the bylaws, removing the breed restriction policy altogether. They never admitted fault, but I knew we had forced them to change. But the damage was done. Friendships had cracked. Trust had eroded. Some neighbors still avoided us, their smiles stiff, their conversations clipped. Yet others grew closer. Families who had once been strangers now waved, stopped to talk, even brought their dogs over for playdates. It was as if our battle had drawn a line in the sand, and the people who chose kindness stood proudly on our side. For our kids, healing took time. Lily started writing again, her notebook filling with stories about heroes who fought against impossible odds. One night, she showed me a drawing she'd made, a little girl holding hands with Big Dog, standing in front of a giant wall with the words, "Rules aren't always right," scrawled across it. Ethan grew braver. He started sleeping without a nightlight. Shadow curled up at his feet. His teacher said he smiled more, spoke louder, laughed easier. And Shadow? He was just Shadow. Loyal, gentle, watchful. He didn't understand the chaos we had gone through. All he knew was that we had kept our promise. We didn't leave him behind. Our story didn't end at the courthouse. The news kept following us for weeks. People across the country reached out, sharing their own battles with HOAs. Some had been fined for bird feeders, others for children's toys left in yards. Even one family for painting their front door the wrong shade of blue. And slowly I realized we weren't alone. Our fight wasn't unique. It was part of something much bigger, a question about where the line should be between order and freedom, between rules and compassion. Petitions started. Other communities challenged their HOA restrictions. Some even cited our case as proof that bylaws could be changed. Looking back now, I sometimes wonder what would have happened if we had given in, if we had paid the fines, surrendered Shadow, and walked away. Life would have been easier, quieter. But then I look at Ethan sleeping peacefully, Shadow's head resting on his feet. I look at Lily scribbling in her notebook, smiling again. I look at Sarah, her eyes bright with relief instead of shadowed with fear. And I know, giving it would have cost us far more than money. It would have cost us our hope, our courage, our belief that doing the right thing matters. So here's what I'll leave you with. What if this were you? What if the dog who healed your family, who protected your children, was suddenly declared illegal by people who had never even met him? Would you surrender? Would you bend to rules written on paper but blind to compassion? Or would you fight, knowing the cost, knowing the pain, but refusing to let fear win? Because here's the truth I learned. Sometimes the rules aren't right. Sometimes the fight is worth it. And sometimes love, even in the form of a scarred, abandoned rescue dog, is the only thing that makes the battle worthwhile. Shadow may never know the war we fought for him. He may never understand the poison, the courtrooms, the sleepless nights. But every time he curls up beside my children, every time he greets us at the door, tail wagging, eyes full of trust, I know we made the right choice. We fought, we won, and Shadow stayed home.